Welcome to Beyond the Bottomline
with Anna Letitia Cook.
Hi, welcome to Beyond the Bottomline. Today we're really lucky. We've got Dorie Clark who's come to join us, who's going to talk about her new book, The Long Game. Now, Dorie is American. She's one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world. She's a #1 communication coach. She also teaches for Fuqua, I can never pronounce that, so excuse me in advance, for Fuqua School of Business and Columbia Business School. She's had several best-selling books. She's very well known as an author, and also she helps business people solve problems, find solutions, get clarity on everything they want. But for me, I've followed Dorie for a long time. The Long Game is wonderful. So I'm so pleased that you're here, Dorie. Welcome to the show, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
So tell me, I really do love this book. I've read all of your books, but this one has given me so many ideas, changed my direction, removed so much pressure, and has made me more relaxed. What was your trigger for writing it? Because it's quite different to the other ones that you've written so far, but it offers so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I was inspired to write The Long Game. I had written my other 3 books in fairly quick succession. I did them in my first book, Reinventing You, came out in 2013. And then my others came out in 2015, 2017. So there was a bit of a frantic pace of information I wanted to get out there. But I took a little time with this book. So there was a 4-year gap in between the most recent one, Entrepreneurial You, and The Long Game. And during that time, one of the things that I immersed myself in the most was the online course and community that I run. It's called Recognized Expert. And it's a community now about 600 plus people who have been through the program, who are professionals that are just looking to grow their platform, to get their ideas out there, to become better known in order to make a bigger impact in their company or in their field. And working with such a large group of folks, I was able to really see patterns in terms of where people were getting hung up and some of the challenges that they faced. And, of course, in my own career, I've experienced those same things. But when you are on your own journey, it's hard to tell what is just your problem and what is a common problem.
Yeah, exactly.
But with that breadth of experience, I was able to see, these are some of the common issues. And one of the situations that I kept seeing again and again was that a lot of the people I worked with wanted to change strategies too frequently because there was, understandably frustration that sometimes just things were not going as fast as they wanted. And I could absolutely empathize. But also I had to kind of be the bad guy in this situation and be like, actually just keep doing that thing that you're doing. And I wanted to write a book about a concept that I call strategic patience, which is basically how do you know when you should keep going and how do you actually do it, even when things are taking longer than you want and even when it can be a really frustrating journey, but you know that the goal is worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what are the advantages and drawbacks for people who are setting goals too close in the future? Because sometimes it can be good, but obviously you've got the pros and cons. So how would you analyze them?
Yeah, well, I think that, certainly we all need to have micro goals that are in the future. I mean, it's okay. Well, what's on your to-do list for tomorrow? It's useful to have a sense of what you want to accomplish. Or, I know that I have a big presentation in 2 weeks. So how am I going to prepare for that? But those are things that fundamentally are tactical. It's this, then this, then this. And great. We all need that, and that's important. But what I was especially interested in The Long Game is the sort of longer horizon of goals. And what I mean by that, maybe it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Those are the goals that you actually can't necessarily map out your list of tactics for because you might not even know how to achieve them. If you have some big, meaningful goal a decade in the future, I mean, like really, you're going to have, a 1,400 point bullet plan about what you're doing every week. I mean, no, the situation's going to change. You don't know what opportunities are going to open up. It's much more speculative, and you have to keep moving in that direction, but you don't necessarily have a super clear roadmap. And that's something that can discomfit a lot of people. But it's important to understand how to master that situation, because for all of us, I mean, hopefully we are moving toward some kind of big picture, meaningful goal for ourselves. So that was the use case that I was really interested in.
Yeah. I think that's from reading your book, that's what helped me the most, because I felt I could allow myself to actually do things much further in the future and not put myself under so much pressure to deliver now. So that was, light bulb moment, totally. But
that's great. Well, what's on your list?
This is a secret. We'll have to wait and see.
Oh, okay. Exciting.
So no, but there's a couple of other articles I've read that you've written recently, which also made me think, yes, I really fancy doing that as well. So it's been very, very good. So what do you say? I mean, I think very much in daily life and holistic success. And I know I bore people to death because I'm always like, it's not just money. It's not just having the biggest title or the biggest car or something like that. It's the day-to-day life, the day-to-day enjoyment in everything. So if we do set long game goals like you're talking about, what do you think that does to improve our daily life and also to reduce stress and pressure? Because that's another thing I found reading your book. I mean, half my stress and pressure just disappeared. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't she write this 10 years ago?
That's amazing. I need to have that, on the Amazon website. It's like reading Dorie's book is like going to the spa.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's addictive. It's like a novel. It is so good and it's so interesting that I just couldn't stop reading it. It's brilliant. I'm definitely the biggest 5-star fan of that book. Right? But anyway,
my goodness.
So yes, back to my question.
Yes, back to the question. So, wait, what was the question? Sorry.
So our current daily life.
Right. There we go. So, okay. I think that for me, one of the ways that I think about the long game, literally the book or the act of playing the long game is, I think, a place where we often go wrong is that we all, of course, understandably want to have some kind of good work-life balance. But the problem is, again, because so much of our orientation culturally is short-term, we actually are looking at the wrong timelines in order to get that balance. And so we look at, a day or a week or even a month and we say, oh, my life's completely out of balance. This is so terrible. I'm so stressed out. But actually, I think one of the liberating elements is understanding that we should have a relatively long timeline when we're thinking about balance as well.
Yes.
Because the truth is, there are always going to be periods where you have to be just, focused pretty intently on work.
Yeah.
And that's not a problem. That's just natural. But what does become a problem if that is literally always the case? If you are an accountant and it is tax season, you're going to be busy. If you're not extra busy, you're probably failing at your job. Like that's what you need to do.
Yes.
But also, once tax season is over, I really hope you take a vacation.
Yeah.
So it's not about achieving balance in a perfectly measured way at all times. It's about thinking. I use a term in the long game called thinking in waves. And so it's what wave are you in now? One example of this, of course, is with COVID. And I know lots of people, especially parents, that are kind of, now that things hopefully maybe are a little bit better and kids are going back to school and things like that, they're sort of regretful, or they're beating themselves up because they were not as productive as they wanted to be during COVID, or they feel like, oh, I was just so stressed out and I couldn't get things done and I slipped behind professionally. And I want to, sort of reassure them, like, you know what? You did what you needed to do. You did what you could. I don't think that it serves anyone to be mad at yourself because there's a global pandemic and you were forced into this situation and you were just doing your best to cope. When there's a crisis, you cope with the crisis. But the key point is that you need to bounce back and you need to say, okay, I was over-indexed on family time during COVID. Now I'm going to take that and I'm going to over-index on work as a way of balancing things out on a longer horizon. And I think that is reassuring because it enables you to say, okay, it wasn't that I threw away that time or I wasted that time. It's that I was emphasizing one thing and now I can emphasize something else.
Yep. I think that's brilliant. I mean, I really relate to that because I spent a lot more time with my grandson during COVID because obviously there wasn't as much work because you couldn't go out and about and go into offices and things like that. So I was like, okay. And my son said, could you just have him because? And I was like, yep, sure. Okay. And I swear never would I normally do that. I'd be like, no, I've got to work. And I thought, do it. Why not? And it was brilliant. And now that it's back and having read your book and giving me all the ideas, I really understand what you're talking about with waves because I think people today, I mean, I'm doing, my old lady head, but I remember when I was young, people used to have short days because that was a sign of success. But I'm talking about the 80s now. And it really was. The big bosses came in at 9:30. They left at 4 or 3:30. They spent 2 days a week with clients on the golf course. And that was success. So that's what we expected. Now people do more and more and more. And they seem to have such short-term goals that they can never take a breath. And that's what I found so, well, light bulb, I can't say anything more about your book, is that you can give yourself permission to do things in waves and not to feel you have to do absolutely everything at once. So you saying, what have I decided to do? My wellness, I'm very interested in corporate wellness and corporate well-being. And I always think, no, I can't do that now because I've got to do this. And I thought, brilliant, put that as my 7-year goal and just gradually focus what I'm doing more and more towards that. Because I mean, I can be very militant and I'm going to attack corporate and really try and get something going. But without your book, I wouldn't have given myself permission to do that. And that's why I love your book so much. I know I'm banging on. Sorry, I will get back to the point. But it really, it had a big impact on me.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Coming back to people's strategies and favoring long game rather than short term, what do you think to do with performance and productivity as well as enjoyment? Because even if we do focus on the long term, we still do need to keep up our performance and our productivity. How can we use the strategies in your book to do that and still keep with the enjoyment of life? Because you talk very much about optimizing for interesting. And I really like that. That sounds so intriguing. So what would you suggest for all of that?
Yeah, thank you. So when it comes to finding ways to make choices about how we're allocating our time and to do that in a way that hopefully is able to simultaneously be productive in the typical corporate ways that one needs to be, and also have it be satisfying and interesting and meaningful. There's a few thoughts. So the first one, to your point, I talk in the long game about the concept of what I call optimizing for interesting, because ultimately I feel like the discourse societally around, what is our point essentially? What should we be aiming at? I think it's a little bit limited or a little bit narrow because we have one strand, of course, which is about, follow your passion, optimize for your passion. That's the only right answer. And of course, if you have some abiding passion, I mean, yeah, go for it. Give it a go. That sounds wonderful. But the truth is, not everybody knows what their passion is, or it's also possible that you have a passion that is so niche that there's maybe not a great way to monetize it.
Yeah.
And so then the answer that people have is, well, okay, fine. If you can't monetize for that or optimize for your passion, then just optimize for money. Everyone should go be a banker. Everyone should go be a corporate lawyer or whatever it is. And
boring.
Yes. I mean, for some people that is their passion, which is great.
True.
But you certainly see plenty of people that's not really what they wanted to do. They did it because they didn't have a better idea. And they thought, well, if I'm not following my passion, I might as well make a lot of money. And, it's not terrible reasoning. It's better than, watching cat videos, but
I like cat videos.
it's true. There is something very compelling. But what I like to suggest instead is that we should really have another option, another possibility on the table. And I am always a fan where we can of lowering the bar, because sometimes we lock ourselves in because we have these impossible standards. Finding your passion, I think oftentimes is an impossible standard or a near impossible one. And a lot of people feel like if they don't know what theirs is, then they're just paralyzed. They're like, well, I have to figure that out first, and I can't do anything until I do. And I want to say, no, the only way you're going to discover or have any clue of discovering what your passion is by actually doing things, by taking action, by experimenting, by getting out there in the world. And so I like to suggest instead that we should be thinking about what I call optimize for interesting, because you might not know what your soulmate professional discipline is, but you certainly know what's interesting to you. And if we just keep making choices that move us in that direction, it inevitably is going to do one of two things. You're either going to keep finding it interesting, in which case keep going, or you'll decide, what, actually, this isn't for me, which is great data to have, and you can try something else.
Yep.
So being out there in the world is what gives us data, and optimizing for interesting is, I think, a very reasonable starting point.
Yeah. That links very much to my next question for you, which is, how do we choose what to aim for? Because it can be really, I can see your cat. Wonderful. My cat will come to say hello in a minute too.
Yes, this is Philip. He loves to make cameo appearances.
Oh, lovely. It adds so much interest. It's brilliant. Yes. How do we know what to choose to aim for? And how do we know what's right for us? And how do we know when to start? Because it's not always easy to choose. And also it's not always easy to decide how long do we try something for before we decide it's wrong and go on to the next. So what's your solution?
Yes, well, there's at every step along the way, there's peril, to your point, right? How do you choose? How do you know? When do you stop?
Exactly.
Okay, this is like the question of an entire lifetime.
Yep. Yes.
So let me highlight a couple of elements. So one starting place element is literally the first third of the long game is about what I consider the true starting point, which is creating white space. Yeah. Because the truth is, it does not take some huge amount of time to do strategic thinking or strategic planning. It's not like you need to take a sabbatical. It's not that it's going to take hours and hours every week. Yeah. We don't have that. But it is also true that it does not take zero time. Yep. You cannot do meaningful long-term thinking if literally all you are doing is rushing from one meeting to another and worrying about your inbox. You just don't have the mental bandwidth. Yep. And so I provide some suggestions about how we can actually create some white space so that we have the ability to ask those questions of ourselves and to try to disengage from all of the momentary pressure so we can even just be, raising it up to, the next level and saying, wait, should I actually be doing this stuff? Is this the right stuff to be doing? Is this going to get me in the direction where I want to go? We have to have the space to ask those questions. And then to your second point about how do we know when to persist? Because it is absolutely true. Well, we know that it is not impossible for super rapid, quote unquote, overnight success to happen. I think we all intellectually realize that's the exception.
Yes.
In most cases, that is not the situation. And in most cases, what happens is if you have a goal, you are probably going to be just slogging for a while trying to get it done. And the problem is not at the beginning when you're very excited about your goal. And the problem is not at the end when you're very close and you can see it and you're very motivated to get across the finish line. The problem is in the middle because you are in this dark tunnel and you are getting pretty much no external feedback saying, oh, good job, keep it up. You're almost there. No one's doing that. And so you have to say, oh my God, this is really taking a long time. Is this worth it? Am I getting here at all? And that's the moment when, without intervention, you are very likely to quit and give up. And unfortunately, that means the goal doesn't happen. The effort is wasted. And so how do you know? No one is probably proactively going to be giving you this positive feedback. And that is why one of the strategies that I talk about in the long game is what I call looking for the raindrops. Because, the metaphor here, of course, is the big rainstorm or the thunderstorm. Because in the moment before it really starts, when the skies open up, it. Okay. Oh, you're in this deluge and oh my gosh, you've gotten the promotion, you've gotten the book deal, whatever the big thing is. Yay. But for a little bit before then, sometimes for a while before then, there are just these drops that are so subtle. You can't even tell. Like you're looking around and you're asking your friends, hey, is it raining? Was that a raindrop? Was I imagining that? Yeah. And you don't know, but it's very, very subtle. And similarly, it's almost never that there is a spigot that gets turned from completely on to completely off or completely off to completely on. There are small signs. And the problem is that we often dismiss them. We ignore them because they seem insignificant to us. And they're things that it's like you start to get more people friending you on LinkedIn. And that's because people are starting to hear about you. There's a little bit of buzz and you might write it off and say, oh, but who are these random people? It's nobody important, but that's a sign. Or you start to get, you get a compliment from your boss and they notice something. Maybe you get asked to go to a meeting or present at a meeting that you wouldn't have been invited to before. Maybe you get invited to contribute something. Oh, the company newsletter is having an article. Could you provide a quote? Or maybe you get asked to be on a podcast and maybe it's a random podcast from somebody in Kyrgyzstan. And it might be like, what is this? But it's a sign that you are getting noticed. And we have to appreciate that and recognize it for what it is, which is validation to keep going on the journey. Yeah.
That's very good. I know, you were saying things like that, and also with trying to decide what to do and when to do it. Another thing that you were talking about was heads up and heads down mode, which I thought was really very interesting, linked to that and linked to deciding when and how and what and all of that. So explain a bit about how heads up and heads down works, because I think that's really valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is a concept that I borrowed from a friend of mine named Jared Kleinert. And he was sort of explaining his strategy about how he approaches things. And I thought, oh, that's very useful. Basically, a problem that a lot of smart professionals have is, of course, what is known as shiny object syndrome, that they constantly see something and, oh, that's good. I should do that. Yeah. And of course, the problem is if you're constantly prancing around to the next great thing, you never actually put in enough time to really get something done or to really show results. And so what Jared suggests, and I think this is really true, is we need to be very conscious of which mode we're in and balancing them out. Now, heads up mode is the time when shiny objects are great because you want to be looking around and scouting for your next opportunity. Yeah. Let's meet all the people. Let's look at all the things. Let's go to all the events and see what's out there that's interesting and valuable that you want to pursue. fantastic. But at a certain point, you need to stop. And what you need to do in order to actually get results is to then go into heads down mode. This is where you're like a monk and you're not meeting all the people. You're not going to all the events. What you are doing in heads down mode is you are focusing, you are working, you are executing. And that is what enables you to get the traction so that your business, your idea, your project, whatever it is, can actually show enough results that it's going somewhere. Now, the existential comfort for people where this is not their natural condition is you can emerge into heads up mode again eventually. Yeah. This is not a permanent state of affairs that all you have to do is just burrow and work, but you need to do it long enough so that you can actually get the momentum you need.
Yeah. I thought your raindrops combined with that, when you see the raindrops and you're like, well, that seems to be a good sign, I think. That is a really good way of then going into the heads down mode and really get going, because you've had almost the validation that something's going in the right direction. So jump right into it. And then when you've done that a bit, you can take a breath of air and have a look and, do all sorts of crazy things like we do. Find another raindrop and go back again. And I thought that was really very interesting. So I know the book's coming out today. So obviously, you haven't got a load of people who've read it, who've been able to get follow it and do something with it. But do you have examples of people who've been following that strategy? Because I'm sure you've been guiding some of your clients in that direction for some time. Otherwise, you wouldn't have written the book, because you would have got, to get the response, the reaction, to see how it works. So have you any examples of successful long game stories?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you're exactly right. In writing the book, I was really inspired by a lot of people in my recognized expert community or coaching clients that I've worked with. And an important piece, and this really is kind of the last section of the book, is what I call keeping the faith. Because to the point that you've been talking about, it is very easy at certain points when you're well into it, but you're not yet seeing the results. That's the inflection point where a lot of people do give up and quit. And I think it's so important to really understand what that looks like, what's at stake, and how to move past it. And so one of my favorite stories from the book actually is about a woman named Ann Sugar. She's a friend and a client of mine that I've worked with for a number of years. And I tell her story in the book. Ann is, very accomplished. She is an executive coach. She coaches for Harvard Business School, executive education. She writes for the Harvard Business Review. I mean, she has great credentials. And there was a situation. I think this is an important point, because no matter, we sometimes think, oh, well, when I get to a certain level of success, then I won't have to worry about it anymore. Then I won't ever be rejected because I will be successful. Yeah. And that is not true. Yeah. At every level, there are gatekeepers. At every level, there are rejections that we have to deal with. And so, with all of these credentials behind her, Anne had started writing for a different business publication. She'd been writing for them for 6 months for free, just as a way of sharing her ideas, getting them out there, building her brand. She wrote 35 articles for free over a 6-month period. This was her voluntary nights and weekends activity. Yeah. And after 6 months, the editor there, who, mind you, had been out of school for a whopping 2 years, fired her from her free job and said, "We don't think you're creative enough. Bye." Just so incredibly insulting.
Oh, God.
And so, of course, Anne was upset like anyone would be, but she did something really smart. And she reached out to a number of friends and colleagues who also wrote for different publications. And she said, hey, has this happened to any of you? Like, how did you respond? Like, she was looking for guidance. She was looking for support. Yeah. And she reached out to a bunch of people, and, they were very encouraging. But one of these people said, "Oh, yeah, the same thing happened to me." And Anne said, "Well, what did you do?" And the woman said, "Oh, well, I never wrote again."
Oh, right.
And Anne realized, just like, whoa. Like she saw the extreme end of the example, and she realized, that's not going to be me.
Yeah.
That is the opposite of what I
Yeah.
want. And so that motivated her to get back on the horse. And within a couple of months, she had found another equally prestigious publication to write for, which she now continues to write for regularly.
Yeah.
But it's really dramatic. A lot of people do give up in those moments, and just understanding that dynamic and the fact that we have to keep pushing forward is so essential.
Yep, definitely. Thank you very much. So, have you any final piece of wisdom or strategy that anyone needs to keep in mind, really to help us going forward and to keep focused on our own long game, whatever we choose for it to be?
Well, I think that one strategy that I will share, and to me, this kind of goes back to your very first point about pacing ourselves.
Yeah.
One of the last stories that I share in the book is about a friend of mine named Dave Crenshaw, who is a productivity and time management expert. And he actually, it's really quite impressive. I guess you need to do this if you're a time management expert, to sort of be credible. But he really walks the talk. He takes 2 months off every year, which is very impressive. Yeah. And he shared a story with me. He said, obviously a lot of people hear that and they're like, oh, amazing. I want to do that. And of course, they kind of go about it all wrong, right? Because they say, well, I'm going to do it. And then they look at their calendar and they're like, oh, but I can't because I have this meeting and then I have this other meeting. And then they just give up on the idea entirely. And so what Dave likes to suggest to people is, he says, look, if you basically got to train for it, it's like training for a marathon or something. He says, if you can't, stop work, like if you're working every night until 9 o'clock at night, you are not going to be able to take 2 months off like that. Just get your house in order first. And so he says, the first thing is if you are a business owner or a professional that is just constantly working late all the time, work on that as training for how to do your vacation. And he says it's almost like resetting your circadian rhythm to to wake up earlier or something like that. He says, don't imagine that if you're working till 9, that the next day, oh, you know what, I'm just through willpower alone, I'm going to stop at 5 p.m. Yeah. No, that doesn't work. Think about ways to ratchet it back, go from 9 o'clock to 8:30 and just master that over time. Because if you are firm and definitive about this is the stopping time, over time, as you learn to do that, you will be able on both a micro and a macro scale to essentially it's training about how to make hard choices. What is essential here? What is not essential? What can I leave until tomorrow? What can I not do? And it makes you a better strategic thinker. And I think that's so powerful because we often assume that being successful is like, well, you just do everything. Yeah. But actually, it's really about training ourselves to be focused more on doing the right things. And I will also just mention that for people who really want to dive into this question and immerse themselves even more, I have a free resource. It's the Long Game Strategic Thinking Self-Assessment, and folks can download it for free at dorieclark.com/thelonggame.
And it's brilliant because I've downloaded it. So a very good idea that.
Thank you.
It's such a good idea, and it really does help you get started and gets you going in the right direction and thinking the right way. So Dorie, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show and all of your advice. And all I can say to everyone listening, buy the book. It makes such a difference. It really does. It's completely changed my direction. So I appreciate everything that you've said. It's some brilliant tips in that. Thank you very much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening. We've been talking on Beyond the Bottom Line. Listen in again next week and see you all very soon. Goodbye.